Hi, good afternoon. I am Annabella, here to show you some of my jewelry collection and talk about some different international styles in jewelry that are, we'll say, vintage to now, things that have a tradition going back more than 1,000 years, but that are all of this still made today. And I'll show you some of the differences, how to age some of it. And I was debating going back the farthest back in chronology, and it's a bit of a tie because these and these both date back well over 1,000 years, not my pieces, but the tradition of them. So I'll start with Italy and with the glass making tradition. So Italy and the glassmakers of Venice have been making glass for over 2,000 years. But in 1291, the political powers in Venice decided that it was too dangerous to have glass making right in the center of the city because it's very high fired. The glass making tradition was too much of a fire hazard in a very, despite there being water because it's a lagoon, too much danger of fire with too many people living closer together. So the glassmakers were not exactly banished, but sort of semi-exiled out to the island of Murano so that they would have fewer people, fewer buildings around them, and could make their glass and in their kilns and with their fire and the glass blowing techniques in an area where it would be safer away from other people. So that was in 1291. And then the second idea behind moving them out was primarily to prevent fires from spreading, but also to preserve their trade secrets on how they were making all of this beautiful glass so that there wouldn't be so many spies coming and going. And even today, if you go to Venice and want to visit Murano and see the glass working, you have to take a boat from the main part of the island, the lagoon, out to Murano, and where they would be happy to show you their pieces and happy to sell you the stuff. So I will show you a couple of different pieces. So the glassmakers of Murano make many, many different things out of glass. Glasses for drinking, decorative items, bowls, all kinds of things, but also very, very much jewelry. And they make many different styles. The most popular style for jewelry that you see the most, and therefore I have the most pieces of this, is a technique called mille fiori. And in Italian, mille fiori is thousands of flowers. And so maybe there are not thousands of them, but there are very many. I'll pass around a couple of these mille fiori. And then when I'm done with the talk, you can all come up and take a look at everything. But the way that they kind of work this is they take little tiny canes, so like sticks of glass, and then they fuse them all together into this technique where it looks like there are many, many different kinds of flowers. So they tend to like them very colorful with many, many colors all in one piece. But you do also, on occasion, not as popular, but actually matches what I'm wearing today, they can make something with just one or two different colors. So this is just a blue and white mille fiori bead necklace with little tiny Murano spacer beads just to make it more decorative, break up the interest. So these are the ones that you find the most. Normally they're round, but here you have ones that are oval shaped. And then what we call gradated beads. So they start smaller and they get bigger until you have the biggest piece down at the bottom, kind of the central, almost like a pendant, but it's all still part of it. So different shapes and sizes. This is one that's a little more unusual. So these are just very plain glass beads, but then with these large ovals that have the different mille fiori pattern on the middle. Similar to that, this has more metal work, but also millefiori, round, flat beads in the middle. And then even more unusual ones where they've done like a long bead with just a few millefiori pieces in the middle, and then some other separator beads, and then some metal work, which you don't see that often on these. So that's the millefiori, the one that is the most popular and that there are the most of. They do another technique called sommerso, which in Italian it means submerged. So this is a sommerso bead one. So in the inside, submerged, sunken into the glass, is the flower and some kind of cloudy looking pieces. So submerged, sommerso, under the glass. So you find these, and then you might have a hybrid piece of the sommerso with something called aventurina. Those are when they have the little gold flakes inside. And that's very popular with Murano for their decorative pieces, where they have like figurines, a dolphin or a cat, or just, you know, a basket, some decorative piece. The gold flecks are very popular, the aventurina. And so these are a mix of sommerso with the aventurina. And then the kind of one of the more fancy ones, and these are also a little bit of a hybrid technique, and these are lamp work. And so this, where they have a base bead, and then the glass maker is blowing a smaller, like a little layer of bead on top of it, and then they make these beads that are called wedding cake beads, because like a wedding cake has many different layers, these beads have many different layers. And I'll actually pass around. So this, oops, not this necklace. This necklace was broken when I bought it, so I fixed it, but I ended up with some spare beads. So Vito will pass around some of the beads so you can see how they are layered on top of each other in the wedding cake beads. So they give them a nice texture. They're not just a flat bead. And then of course you can have them in many different colors. So those are the Murano, and they are still being made today. You can go to the island and you can buy the millefiori beads. If you go to Venice and you stick to the main part of the island and go into some of the tourist shops and find very inexpensive Murano beads, very likely they are made in China and they are knockoffs of the original beads being brought, like so many other things. If it's too, so this would be an example of, these are inexpensive knockoff beads. They look pretty good, but when you compare the quality, you can kind of see that they are a little bit different. And that's a hard thing for the makers to compete against the inexpensive imports, but that is what happens. So that is the Murano pieces, but Italy has many other glass making techniques, and these are some examples of mosaic pieces. So if you've been to museums or you've ever been to Pompeii or somewhere like that, you've seen mosaics that were used for floor materials. They're very famous ones in Pompeii. Actually, in Worcester, at the Worcester Art Museum, there is a big mosaic floor in the middle that they found, Roman era. So going back to the time of the Romans, the Italians were already working with mosaics. So eventually that turned to jewelry making, very, very popular during the big Grand Tour era, where the English would come, do their Grand Tour of Italy and buy their souvenirs. And they started the technique of micro mosaics. Unfortunately, I don't have micro mosaics because they are very collectible and very, very expensive, but they look like a painting. But they are all individual pieces of glass or enamel that is very shiny like glass, put into a brooch. This is this is not a micro mosaic, but this is the finest mosaic piece that I have. And I'll pass this around and you'll see how it paints a picture, but if you saw a true micro mosaic, you would have to almost look with a magnifying glass to see that it is actually little individual pieces of glass. They are so tiny in the micro mosaics, but in these mosaic pieces, you can easily with the naked eye see the different pieces. And sometimes they make them out of stone, but they're usually glass. And the technique is to have a base, a metal base, and then just like you would cement the tile that's on the floor here, they put cement on the bottom. And then they cement it in, and then you'll see the lines just like you would on a tile floor, the different little individual pieces of glass. And they're still made today in Rome, Florence, and Naples mostly. Naples being the big center for making jewelry in Italy in general, and they make cameos and gold jewelry and gemstones, but they continue to make the mosaics. Do you want to pass these around? Now I'm going to contrast a little bit a more contemporary piece with a very vintage piece. The very, very vintage pieces, so these would be from anywhere from the turn of the century, the late Victorian era, to about the time before World War II. And they tended to use much duller colors. Still primary colors, but not as shiny and bright, more muted colors. It's hard to tell. A lot of jewelry dating techniques are based on the backs and the clasps, but the Italians haven't changed the backing and the clasps very much over the decades and over the centuries. It's hard to date the pieces from that, but you can date them from the colors. Much brighter. This is newer, and I can't date it. It could be from 20 years ago, it could be from 40 years ago. It's very hard to tell. But I'll pass these around so you can see that the technique of the mosaic making is still very, very similar, but you'll see one, the colors less bright, less out there, and then the metalwork also, darker metalwork, less bright metalwork, but still very pretty and very collectible, and used not only for jewelry. This is a little pillbox with the mosaic top. They make frames out of it. They make other decorative items with these little mosaic pieces. Pins are the most popular, brooches are the most popular item, but there are bracelets as well, necklaces, pendants, so all of that. Oh, and I forgot to show these when I was showing the Venetian ones. So usually they're beads, but they do also use, and you can see the light shine right through it, they do use the millefiori in a pendant. So these are a couple of pendants that have, and with these, I'll pass these around because here, since they're set in glass, instead of being set like into a bead onto itself or onto another metal, you can actually really see the technique here because you can see both sides of the canes. So that's going back to that. This one is set in a metal piece, but with those pendants that are set in glass, you can really see the technique. So it's very hard sometimes, as I said, to date them because the clasps are the same. This barrel clasp that they have used for the Venetian, it's shaped like a little barrel and it twists. They used it 100 years ago and they use it today. So it's very hard to say, oh, look at it, has a barrel clasp, so that means it's from a certain era. It's very hard for us to tell because they continue to use the same kind of clasp. So those are the Italian ones. Now going back to, similarly to a technique from more than 1,000 years ago, is Damascene, which is named for Damascus, Syria. That's where it seems to have originally come from. Though now we don't really associate Damascene with Syria, we associate it with Spain and Japan. They are the two biggest makers of Damascene jewelry traditionally and today. In Syria, they used Damascene to decorate swords and other weapons, and eventually the Spanish and the Japanese also used the technique to decorate their swords and other weapons. But when sword making was eventually banned in Japan, sometime in the late 17th and 18th century, the craftspeople who knew how to make these beautiful things had to turn their craft to something new. So something less violent, they turned it to jewelry making. So they started to make this Damascene. So the technique of Damascene is a dark metal on the bottom, then it gets incised, like cut out, and then overlaid with a precious metal, mostly gold, but a little bit silver as well. But most of it is gold and different shades of gold. But it's a very, very thin layer of gold, like a veneer. So that makes the pieces affordable, not so expensive, because it's not a lot of gold. It's just really a tiny, tiny layer on the top. And the thing that's fun to look at the shapes and the type of jewelry that they make, they're very similar, the Japanese and the Spanish. And in fact, if it wasn't for some of the decorations and maybe turning it over to see if it's signed made in Spain or made in Japan, it would be very hard to tell which was which, because both of these cultures have a tradition of fans. So fans are a very popular theme for the jewelry. These happen to be both Spanish, but butterflies, that's another thing. So this is a Spanish butterfly, and this is a Japanese butterfly. And this is a fan. I don't have a brooch, a Japanese brooch, but I do have a Japanese necklace that's all fans. And it's signed on the back, Amita, A-M-I-T-A. That's the biggest maker of Damascene jewelry in Japan, and they still are in operation today. But what makes you know it's a Japanese piece without turning it over to see that it was made in Japan will be some of the themes. And all of my Japanese pieces have Mount Fuji on them. They love Mount Fuji, so you'll see Mount Fuji or you'll see a temple. You will see some of the same themes, birds and flowers, that you would see on the Spanish pieces, but of course the Japanese ones would distinctly have Mount Fuji or a temple, as this one does, which is all fans. And this one is just shapes, but you see trees and you see temples, and in the background you see Mount Fuji, which is such a popular and famous thing. So these are all these different pieces. The Spanish really, really like flowers and birds. So the majority of their pieces have flowers or birds. And they make everything: bracelets, pendants, earrings, necklaces, rings. Everything comes in Damascene, and it's still made today. At one point when the gold was more expensive and getting more expensive, and the technique of making all of these layers got more expensive, but people still wanted to have the pieces, someone had the brilliant idea of, let's do a cheaper version. Cheaper, easier, faster. So they started to make, I wouldn't call it knockoffs, because they're not trying to make you think it is something that it isn't, because the differences are, you can see them. But they started making a cheaper technique, and that's now called Toledoware, because the center of Damascene making in Spain was in the city of Toledo, just outside of Madrid, a little less than an hour away. And I'll pass around the, well, you'll see the Japanese butterfly, but you can look at it against the Spanish butterfly, which is Toledoware, and you'll see the difference, that this is just kind of painted on. It has a texture to it, but it isn't layers of metals. It's just painting different. So you can see the difference, but this allowed more production and less expensive for people. So the Toledoware is still very pretty and still very popular. And here you see it a lot with very popular themes to the Spanish culture. So I have Spanish galleon ships, like the Armada. These are Toledoware. Another kind of like an ancient ship that is Toledoware. And who wouldn't love a pair of castanets made into earrings? And they even clink like castanets do when you shake your head or you walk around with them. So there is lots and lots of Toledoware. And I don't have, oh, I do. So I'll pass around the fans so you can see a Toledoware fan and a Damascene fan. And you can see the difference. From afar, you probably can't see the difference. But when you look closely, you will definitely see that there is a difference in the layering technique. So that is the Damascene. And this is one of my favorites. This is a charm, kind of a semi-charm bracelet. It's panels, then with little charms hanging off of it. And these are typical Spanish things again. A horse and a bull, of course. The Spanish like the bull, and a little hat, the hat that the bull fighter wears during the show. And unfortunately, there's one missing. The charm has gone missing, but I believe it was probably a pair of castanets. Because I've seen these charm bracelets with the castanets, and mine is missing the castanets. But still very pretty. So that is the Damascene. And in Spain, it was brought over by the Moors, that technique and that tradition from Syria. So that is the history. And in Japan, it was really brought through the Silk Road. And both of them around the same time started to apply them to their weapons. See, and then the most contemporary, still vintage, but most contemporary, that I unfortunately have the fewest of, but that I will show you today, which is the Scandinavian work, mid-century modern. And in the tradition, so we think of mid-century modern and Danish modern, mostly in terms of furniture, which I remember Mom and Dad, we had beautiful teak made in Denmark furniture in the 1970s, and then it fell out of fashion. And nobody wanted it in the 80s, and we traded it for Ethan Allen, 80s furniture. Oh, how I wish we had the Danish modern that is so popular now, so classic and so collectible now. But we all got rid of it in the 80s after it fell out of fashion. But the jewelry never really fell out of fashion. And so as they were making furniture and silver pieces, cups and flatware and other things in this modern technique, kind of sleek, not really over ornamented, they started to make jewelry, of course. So in Denmark, and primarily Denmark and Norway. The Swedish have some, but you don't see a lot of pieces. And sadly for me, I have only one piece of Danish silver, so it is sterling. This has amethyst cabochons, but this is made in Denmark in a very sleek style, very unfussy. You don't see a lot of, like you would on flatware where there are a lot of flowers and things like that. It's straight lines, kind of flat lines, very pretty flower, but not overly like Victorian, overly decorated. And so this is a Danish piece. And interestingly, around that same time in the US, which if you come to my earlier talks when I did the New England and the New York jewelry makers, the makers here in the Northeast also started to make this style, kind of Danish modern. And there, in fact, was a company called Danecraft, made here in the USA, but the name Danecraft, and they made sterling silver jewelry in some of the same styles and themes and shapes as the things that were made in Denmark. So this is my lone piece of Danish modern. And then I'm wearing this heart is made by a Norwegian maker named David Anderson. He actually died in 1901, but his company continued and they're still in business today. And about in the mid-century, they started to make these pieces that are sterling with enamel on top. And enamel jewelry has a history going back more than 1,000 years, primarily from France and Germany, but then the Scandinavians started to use it in their jewelry in the mid-century, and they favor nature patterns. So this is a heart, which I guess is natural, but this doesn't look like a natural heart. But flowers, very popular, and butterflies. And butterflies are probably the most common theme that you see in sterling enamel jewelry from Scandinavia. And George Jensen, who primarily made flatware and kitchen items made out of sterling. I don't have any George Jensen jewelry, unfortunately, but that's also still in production since for 120 years, but they still make jewelry as well. And they worked a lot with the guilloche enamel, which is a French technique. And what they do here, and I'll pass these butterflies around, it's a layering technique. So they create a pattern on top of the silver. These are sterling, they usually use sterling. And then they layer the different pieces with the colored glass underneath the enamel. And then they put a melted glass on top to make it shiny and to make the layer. And so if you look closely at the butterflies, you'll see the lines in there, and those are the different layers of things called this guilloche. And guilloche was very popular, not just for jewelry, but also for other ladies' vanity items. So you will find a lot of guilloche compacts from when ladies used to always have a compact in their purse with their powder and a mirror. You see a lot of guilloche compacts, and the Scandinavians made those as well. So that is some of my international jewelry, and I hope I'll come back at another time and do Central and Eastern Europe and some of the pieces that come from there. Also very big on the glass making techniques, but so much other international jewelry to talk about and to collect and to wear. So thank you all, and you're all welcome to come up and look at the other pieces that I didn't have a chance to pass around, or to ask me any questions. Oh, and I should have shown, of course, there's a Spanish dancer, because that would be another theme. A flamenco dancer, you would find that, or a bullfighter. Anything that's very popular there, they made it into jewelry to sell it to the tourists.
Do you sell it?
I don't sell it, no.
So what do you do with it?
I wear it.
Show it.
I wear it. I wear it. I'm wearing it now. I'm wearing this, and I'm wearing, there isn't a lot of it. So now I don't know where this is made. My bracelet, I'll show you the bracelet that I'm wearing. It might have been made in Denmark. It is sterling with enamel on top, but the scenes are from the Netherlands. The Netherlands doesn't really have a great jewelry making history, tradition. So I don't know, because it doesn't say, it just says sterling on the clasp. There's no country name. And actually, since we're talking about that, when I do my Central and Eastern Europe talk later, I'll have some Czech pieces. Czechoslovakia, in between the wars, made a lot of jewelry, a lot of glass jewelry, but they also sold a lot of the glass to the makers here in the Northeast without their name on it, so that they could pass it off as being made in the USA. And there's no way to tell. We have no way to tell. So this bracelet, which is probably from the 50s, probably meant as a tourist piece for people visiting the Netherlands, because it's got windmills and a little Dutch boy holding a pail, very classic Dutch scenes. But it might have been made in Denmark. We don't really know, because they didn't sign the pieces. Because you wouldn't want to go to Amsterdam and then buy something made in Copenhagen. And so they never signed the pieces from where they were from. So, but I wear it. So, and I mix and match. So I have my Norwegian and my whatever this is, and American made deco ring, and then, so I wear it.
Can we clap?
Thank you. So please feel free to come up and take a look.